At the airport, my dad hugged my sister and said, "Have the best time in Costa Rica. You earned this trip." Then he turned to me and said, "Someone had to stay behind and be responsible." My mom tossed me the house key and said, "Don't mess anything up." They had no idea I booked my own one-way first-class ticket. I, 32M, watched my entire family board a plane to Costa Rica while they thought I was heading home to water their plants. Standing in the airport terminal, I felt my father's hand land on my sister's shoulder with that familiar weight of approval I'd spent 3 decades chasing. He told her to have the best time in Costa Rica, that she'd earned this trip. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Then he turned to me with that look I knew too well, the one that said I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who stayed behind while everyone else got to live. My mother pressed the house key into my palm without meeting my eyes. She reminded me not to mess anything up, to water the plants, to check the mail, to make sure everything was perfect for when they returned. My sister smirked at me from behind them, her designer luggage tags catching the fluorescent light. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. We both knew our roles in this family. I nodded. I smiled. I told them to have a great time. And then I watched them disappear through security, their laughter echoing back toward me as they joked about drinks on the beach and zip-lining through the rainforest. The trip they'd planned for 6 months. The trip they'd talked about at every family dinner. The trip I'd supposedly been too busy to join because someone needed to hold down the fort. What they didn't know was that I had my own ticket. First class. One way. To Tokyo. I waited 20 minutes after they cleared security before I walked to the opposite end of the terminal. My single carry-on bag felt light compared to the weight I'd been carrying for years. Inside was everything I actually needed. Everything else, I'd already shipped ahead or sold off. The apartment I'd been renting was cleaned out. My resignation letter had been on my boss's desk for 2 weeks. My phone had exactly 7 contacts left in it, and none of them were family. The gate agent scanned my ticket with a smile that felt like the first genuine human interaction I'd had in months. I settled into my seat, accepted the champagne I was offered, and watched through the window as another plane taxied away from the gate. I wondered if that was theirs. I wondered if they'd realized yet that I wasn't answering my phone. They wouldn't figure it out for a while. I'd set up auto-responses. I'd scheduled texts to send periodically. By the time they landed in Costa Rica and settled into their resort, they'd assume I was dutifully checking on their empty house like the good son I'd always been. The truth was more complicated than they'd ever bothered to learn. It started 18 months ago when my grandfather died. He was the only person in the family who ever really saw me, who ever asked what I wanted instead of what I could do for everyone else. He left me money. Not a fortune, but enough to change everything. The will specified it was for me alone, for my future, for my dreams. My parents had been furious when they found out. They'd expected the inheritance to be split equally, or better yet, put into the family pool to help with my sister's business venture or their retirement fund. I'd said no. It was the first time I could remember refusing them anything. My sister had called me selfish. My mother had cried about family loyalty. My father had gone silent with that disappointed look that used to make me cave immediately. But this time I held firm. The money went into accounts they couldn't touch. I started planning. My sister had always been the golden child. She'd failed out of 2 colleges, started 3 businesses that our parents had funded and that had all collapsed, and was currently consulting, which seemed to mostly involve posting on social media and asking for loans she never repaid. She was 34 and had never held a job for more than 6 months. Our parents called her entrepreneurial and free-spirited. I'd been working since I was 16. I'd put myself through college while living at home to save money, which really meant being the live-in handyman and occasional ATM. I'd built a solid career in software development, saved aggressively, kept my head down. Our parents called me responsible and dependable, which I eventually understood was code for convenient. The Costa Rica trip was supposed to be a family vacation. They'd brought it up at Christmas. Everyone was going, they said. It would be good for us to spend time together. The cost per person was steep, but they assured me I could afford it. After all, I had that inheritance money just sitting there. I'd felt that old familiar pressure building in my chest. The expectation that I'd say yes, that I'd pay not just for myself, but probably subsidize my sister's portion too, since her consulting business was having a slow quarter. I'd open my mouth to agree, to fall into the pattern we'd established over 32 years. But then my father had made a comment about how I never did anything interesting anyway. So what else would I spend money on? My mother had laughed and agreed that at least this way I'd finally go somewhere. My sister had rolled her eyes and said something about how boring my life was. That's when it crystallized. They didn't actually want me there. They wanted my wallet. They wanted the illusion of family unity. They wanted someone to take pictures of them and carry bags and make sure reservations were confirmed. They wanted the version of me that existed to serve their needs. I'd smiled and told them I'd think about it. Over the next few weeks, I did think about it. I thought about every childhood memory where my accomplishments were glossed over while my sister's mediocrity was celebrated. I thought about every holiday where I'd cooked and cleaned while she showed up late and left early. I thought about every time I'd loaned money that was never repaid, fixed problems I didn't create, swallowed my own needs to accommodate theirs. I thought about my grandfather telling me, 2 months before he died, that I needed to live for myself. That family was important, but not when it destroyed you from the inside out. That the money he was leaving me wasn't just money, it was permission. Permission to stop being the person they needed and start being the person I wanted to be. So I'd made my own plans. Tokyo had been my dream since I was 12 years old. I'd taught myself Japanese through apps and online courses. I'd been working remotely for a tech company with offices in Asia. I'd been quietly networking, building connections, setting up opportunities. When I'd asked about a transfer, they'd been enthusiastic. Talented developers who spoke Japanese and understood American business culture were valuable. They'd offered me a position that started 3 months out. I'd given myself those 3 months to extract myself from every obligation, every expectation, every chain my family had wrapped around me. I'd helped my sister with one last crisis, co-signed my parents' refinancing paperwork so they could take the Costa Rica trip, made sure everything was settled. I'd played the role perfectly one final time. Then I'd gone silent on my plans. When they brought up Costa Rica again at dinner 6 weeks ago, I told them I couldn't afford it. My mother had huffed about how I clearly had money since I'd bought a new laptop. My sister had made a snide comment about priorities. My father had launched into a speech about family coming first. I'd apologized and said I needed to be responsible with my finances. They'd been annoyed, but not surprised. Of course, I was too boring and cheap to join them on their adventure. They'd never asked what I was actually doing with my money or my time. They'd never questioned why I'd been decluttering my apartment or why I'd stopped making long-term plans with them. They'd been too wrapped up in their own excitement to notice I'd been saying goodbye. The night before the trip, they'd called me over for dinner. This was when they'd asked me to house sit, to handle everything while they were gone. My sister had already stored some boxes in their garage that she needed me to deal with. My mother had a whole list of tasks. My father wanted me to handle some paperwork for him. 2 weeks of my life, dedicated to managing their concerns while they relaxed on the beach. I'd agreed to all of it. I'd taken the key. I'd written down every instruction. I'd hugged them goodbye and told them I'd see them when they got back. The plane's engines hummed as we prepared for takeoff. I looked down at the house key in my hand, then dropped it into the seat pocket in front of me. Someone would find it eventually, or they wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. My phone buzzed with the first automated text I'd scheduled. It told my parents I'd made it home safely and was settling in. Tomorrow's message would confirm I'd checked the house. The day after would mention watering the plants. I'd spaced them out carefully, each one maintaining the illusion that I was exactly where they expected me to be. By the time they figured out the truth, I'd be 9 time zones away. The flight attendant asked if I needed anything. I requested another glass of champagne and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Not happiness yet, but the space where happiness might grow. The absence of weight. 14 hours to Tokyo. Then a new apartment I'd already secured, a job that started in 2 weeks, a life that belonged entirely to me. I'd been studying the neighborhood where I'd be living, practicing the route-side walk, imagining mornings in coffee shops and evenings exploring the city. I'd been learning to be alone with myself, to figure out who I was when I wasn't being who they needed. The plane lifted off and I watched my old life shrink beneath me. Somewhere down there, my family was boarding their own flight, completely unaware that the person they'd taken for granted had already left the building. They'd call eventually. They'd be angry. They'd demand explanations. They'd try guilt and manipulation and everything else that had worked for 3 decades. But I wouldn't be there to receive it. I disabled my old number once I landed. My email would bounce back. My social media had been deleted weeks ago. I'd left them a letter, though. It was sitting in their mailbox, timed to arrive 2 days after they got back from Costa Rica. Long enough for them to panic when I didn't respond. Long enough for them to realize I'd actually left. The letter was short. I'd rewritten it a dozen times, trying to explain everything, trying to make them understand. But in the end, I kept it simple. I told them I needed to live my own life. I thanked them for raising me. I wished them well. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't tell them about Tokyo or the job or any of my plans. They didn't need to know. They didn't deserve to know. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about freeing myself. But if they felt punished by my absence, maybe that said something about what my presence had really meant to them. Update 1. I'm writing this from my apartment in Shibuya, 3 weeks after that flight. The first few days were exactly as disorienting as I'd expected. The jet lag was brutal, the language barrier was real despite my preparation, and there were moments when I questioned everything. But even in those moments of doubt, I never once thought about going back. My family figured it out on day 4 of their Costa Rica trip. I know this because my old email address, which I kept active but stopped checking regularly, started filling up with increasingly frantic messages. I'd looked at them once, scrolling through the progression from confused to angry to desperate. My mother's subject lines alone told the story. Where are you? To this isn't funny to please call us. My sister's messages were more direct. She'd apparently driven to my apartment when they got home early to confront me, only to find new tenants moving in. The landlord had told her I'd fulfilled my lease and left no forwarding information. She'd tried to file a missing person report, but the police had apparently found my trail quickly enough. Employment records showing an international transfer, bank records showing planned transactions, no signs of foul play. I wasn't missing. I was gone. There's a difference. My father had tried a different approach. His messages were calm, measured, talking about responsibility and family obligations. He reminded me about the paperwork I'd supposedly agreed to handle, the tasks I'd promised to complete. He didn't mention being worried about me. He mentioned being inconvenienced by my absence. I read them all once, felt that old guilt trying to take root, and then let it go. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I'd said everything I needed to say in that letter, and if they didn't understand it, no amount of additional conversation would help. Work started, and it was challenging in the best possible way. My colleagues were welcoming, but professional. Nobody knew my history. Nobody had expectations of who I should be. I could just exist as myself, figuring out who that even was. I made mistakes. I got lost on the train system more times than I wanted to admit. I accidentally ordered things I didn't mean to at restaurants. I had moments of crushing loneliness where I missed having someone to call, before remembering that I'd never really had that anyway. But I also had moments of pure joy. Watching the sunrise from my apartment window, successfully navigating a conversation entirely in Japanese, finding a small bookstore that stayed open late, making a colleague laugh, cooking dinner for myself in my tiny kitchen, simple things that belonged entirely to me. My neighbor, an elderly woman who spoke almost no English, had taken to leaving small packages of homemade pickles outside my door. I tried to thank her properly, fumbling through my rehearsed Japanese, and she'd just smiled and patted my arm. It was more genuine affection than I'd received from my own family in years. 3 weeks in, a friend of my mother's somehow tracked down my company's main number and tried to reach me through work. My boss had asked me about it, clearly concerned there was some emergency. I'd explained, carefully, that my family and I were estranged and that I'd prefer not to be contacted through work. He'd simply nodded and said he'd handle it. The call stopped. That night, I'd written a single email to my parents' address. I told them I was safe, I was employed, and I needed space. I asked them not to contact me or try to find me. I told them that maybe, someday, we could have a relationship, but it would have to be different from what it had been. It would have to be mutual. It would have to involve them seeing me as a person, not a resource. I didn't expect a response that would satisfy me, and I didn't get one. My mother wrote back immediately, a wall of text about how hurt they were. How could I do this? What would people think? Didn't I care about family? My sister sent a message calling me selfish and cruel. My father's response was brief, saying I'd regret this decision and that the door would remain open, but I'd need to be the one to walk through it with an apology. An apology? For leaving? For choosing myself? For refusing to set myself on fire to keep them warm? I didn't respond to any of them. I archived the emails and went back to building my life. Update 2. 6 months in Tokyo, and I barely recognize the person I used to be. I've found a rhythm here, a version of life that fits me in ways I didn't know were possible. The job is going well enough that they've already talked about extending my contract. I've made friends, actual friends who invite me to things because they enjoy my company, not because they need something from me. The guilt has faded to something manageable. I still have moments where I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have tried harder to explain, if there was a version of this that didn't require complete severance. But then I remember how I felt in that airport terminal, watching them laugh while handing me their house key, and I know I made the right choice. My sister got married last month. I know this because she sent me an invitation, forwarded through my company's HR department after somehow discovering where I worked. The invitation included a note about how hurt she was that I'd missed so many family milestones, how I was destroying our mother with my silence, how the least I could do was show up for her wedding. The wedding was destination, naturally, Santorini. I looked at the invitation for a long time, at the expensive cardstock and the elegant calligraphy. I wondered who'd paid for it, suspected it was probably our parents, and felt nothing but a distant sort of sadness. Not for missing the wedding, but for the relationship we'd never actually had beneath all the dysfunction. I didn't RSVP. I didn't send a gift. I did, however, make a donation to a charity that helped young people establish independence from abusive family situations. It felt more honest than pretending we had the kind of relationship where my presence at her wedding would mean anything real. Through a former colleague who still had connections to my old life, I heard that the wedding went well. I also heard that I'd become the family story, the cautionary tale, the ungrateful son who'd abandoned everyone. My mother apparently told people I'd had a breakdown. My sister claimed I'd stolen money from them. My father just said I'd always been difficult. None of it was true, but I understood they needed a narrative that made sense to them, one where they weren't the problem. Let them have it. I was building something better than their approval. I'd started seeing someone, a woman I'd met through a hiking group. She was Japanese-American, had moved to Tokyo for similar reasons of reinvention, and understood what it meant to create distance from a family that couldn't see you clearly. We took things slowly, both of us careful with our healing hearts. She didn't push me to reconcile with my family. She didn't suggest that blood should override boundaries. She just accepted that I was who I was, building the life I needed. My apartment had personality now. I'd collected art from local markets, found furniture that actually suited my taste instead of being whatever was cheapest or most practical. I'd learned to cook Japanese food with varying degrees of success. I joined a gym, started rock climbing, picked up photography as a hobby. Small things that people with normal lives probably took for granted, but that felt revolutionary to me. I'd also started therapy. My company's health insurance covered it, and I'd found a therapist who specialized in family estrangement and cultural transition. She'd helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just being taken for granted. It was a pattern of emotional manipulation and exploitation that I'd normalized because it was all I'd known. She'd asked me once what I would say to my younger self, the one who'd spent decades trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I'd thought about it for a long time before answering that I'd tell him he was enough, that he didn't need to earn his place, that leaving wasn't failure. Sometimes it was the only way to survive.